Just a small correction there. Progressive Labor Party, not Australian Progressives. Yeah. Okay, that's right. Yeah.
I was reading what they put on there.
Oh, okay, that's right. Thanks very much. It's really good to be down here from what used to be called the Big Smoke, Newcastle, when we had a steelworks. But look, it's important to know that there's still a steel industry there, a lot of steel manufacturing, just that the basic steel making has disappeared now. Okay, look, I think I probably over-prepared and I've cut it right down, so to fit into the 20 minutes. So if I can just... Thanks very much, yeah. Okay, I've on the topic I've divided into three sections. One is to be able to understand the Bernie Sanders effect or situation, is to look at the history of the left in the US first of all, and then the second section is... Okay, one moment. Who's on the sound there? Yeah. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So the second section's on the current situation of the left. So there's a bit of a history of the left to try and understand what's happened. The current situation with Bernie Sanders and the left in the US, and then the third bit, of course, is looking at what lessons that might have for us here in Australia. Okay, first of all, a little quote that sets things in a perspective. It comes from a couple of different authors, but all in one. The socialist movement in the United States has historically been relatively weak. Unlike socialist parties in Europe, Canada and Oceania, that's us, a major social democratic party never materialised in the US. And the socialist movement remains marginal, almost unique in its powerlessness among the Western democracies. Right, from that point, we go on. Looking at what actually happened and why it may have become weak. The US left in the early 1900s, between 1900 and 1920. By that stage, by 1920, the industrial workers of the world, the IWW, was all virtually destroyed. It's very similar to that pattern here in Australia. And the Socialist Party, which was quite a significant party there under Debs and so on in the US in the 1910s and so on, peaking in about 1912, that Socialist Party was tending to fall apart. The Socialists had lost a major ally in the Wobblies because those two organisations parted ways, and their free speech had been restricted, and Debs, the charismatic leader, was in prison along with hundreds of his fellow members. Okay, so after crippling schisms within the Socialist Party itself and a change in public opinion, the party found itself unable to gather popular support. They were beaten down by their strikes were beaten down by force, and the economy was doing just well enough to keep the people from coming into a mass rebellion. So by August 1919, of course, right in the middle of all this going on, the CPUSA was formed and had at least 50,000 members fairly quickly, and that's actually at the same time as the Socialist Party still had 40,000. So you're looking at around about at least 90,000 people either in the Socialist Party or the newly forming Communist Party of the USA. That combined total of 90,000 equalled 0.08% of the population of the United States. That might seem, well, that's a wild statistic, but you'll see why it's important fairly soon. And it's I'm not a statistician, and in fact, maths was never my strong point, but there is a comparison that can be made. By 1944, the membership of the CPUSA itself peaked at about 80,000, and apparently some 1,500 of these members were FBI informants. Interesting statistic. No, well, actually, yeah, I've got some figures in the back of my head about that too. Okay, so the peak, the CPUSA membership at its peak of 80,000 in 1944 represented 0.06% of the then US population. So actually, even at its peak, when it was at 80,000, proportion of population, it was actually less than it was in 1919. By the mid-1950s, after the McCarthy period, membership of the CPUSA slipped to an active base membership of about 5,000. Now, a little comparison with Australia, and an important one. The population of Australia was 7.4 million in 45. Our membership of the CPA had peaked at around about 24,000, and that's about 0.324% of the Australian population. 3 times, an equivalent 3 times that of the main left in the USA. And I'll come. That's important towards the end of the talk. So hang on to that one. The McCarthyist period in the US was absolutely devastating. Everyone's heard about the blacklists that were circulating. They were at work throughout the entertainment industry, in universities and schools at all levels, in the legal profession and many other fields. In the film industry, more than 300 actors, authors and directors were denied work in the US through the unofficial blacklists. The authorities were worried about communist influence and Russian spying. There's a little bit of an echo going on relating to that right now in the US of A. They were worried about where they're worried about Russian hacking. Yeah. Okay, so then of course you're looking at that was devastating. I mean, Charlie Chaplin. I'm sure most people in this room know that Charlie Chaplin had to leave the US because of the repression against all sorts of a left wing and particularly, of course, communist artists. On top of it, there you go. Yeah. So then we come to the 1960s and 70s. The anti-apartheid and anti-Vietnam War movement gave a new impetus to the left in the USA and, of course, in Australia too. And at various periods in that whole history, there's been the emergence of utopian socialism. And I'm looking around the room. There's got to be a fair few people here who recall the Back to the Land movement, inspired mainly by the US, but also the commune movement, back to the land here in Australia, where Nimbin was one of the things that happened. People wanted to try and show by example that there was a better way of living and sharing and caring and so on, ignoring crucial elements of class struggle, of course, but nevertheless it was an important movement. The utopian socialists were, of course, early in Europe in the early 1800s, again in the 1890s in Australia, when the New Australia movement, and then the commune movements of the late 60s and 70s in Australia they mirrored what was going on in the United States. Okay, so the key points to note in this first part about the left in the situation of the left in the US are that at its peak, the left in Australia was many times larger per proportion of population than the left in the US. Even though the left in Australia was curtailed somewhat by the Cold War and anti-communism, influence of the groupers and legislation, the left in the US suffered much more, as the McCarthyist witch hunts showed. Okay, second section, Bernie Sanders and the current situation of the left in the US. This is more or less a chronological review of the last 6 months, drawing on about 20 different sources. First one from February is headed Sanders rejects effort to draft him into starting a new political party. And Sanders said he prefers the Democratic Party reform over a splinter party. Second one, also in February, about a week later, Mike Whitney, quoting Glenn Greenwald. Greenwald, Ed Snowden fame, yes, so if you probably realise. It's entitled "Lie Down with Dogs, Get Up with Fleas." And he quotes Greenwald, "I think that the Trump presidency is extremely dangerous. They want to dismantle the environment, they want to eliminate the safety net, they want to empower billionaires, they want to enact bigoted policies against Muslims and immigrants and so many others. And it's important to resist them. But if you're somebody who believes that both the CIA and the deep state on the one hand and the Trump presidency on the other are extremely dangerous, as I do," this is Greenwald, "there is a huge difference between the two, which is that Trump was elected and is subject to some democratic controls. On the other hand, the CIA was elected by nobody. They're barely subject to democratic controls at all, and so to urge that the CIA and the intelligence community empower itself to undermine an elected branch of government is insanity. It is that is the prescription for destroying democracy overnight in the name of saving it." Where are we? One moment. Just to pick up again. Yes, so that destroying democracy overnight in the name of saving it. In other words, if you lie down with dogs, you'll get up with fleas. This is where the headline comes from. Leftists should avoid the temptation of aligning themselves with groups and agencies that might help them achieve their short-term goal of removing Trump, but ultimately move them closer to a de facto 1984. Misplaced support for the deep state Russophobes, as Greenwald says, will only strengthen the national security state's stranglehold on power. That is not a path to victory. Okay, a second chronological quote, but this time in April this year. Syria, the US left and the anti-war movement. The left ignored the New York Times reporting that Obama was working with regional allies to recruit, train and arm soldiers while funding them to attack the Syrian government. In 2013, the New York Times revealed that the US had been overseeing a regional weapons pipeline to arm fighters, but this news barely registered on the left's radar. Every new enemy of the US military is compared to Hitler because it's moral to kill Hitler, an idea that now is rebranded as humanitarian intervention. That rings a few bells, Libya just been won. Just about every war the US has ever waged was labelled humanitarian, including taming the savages during the indigenous American genocide. The left shouldn't fall victim to dehumanising the enemy of the US. It's true that Assad is no prince, but he's a problem the Syrians have to deal with, not us. Don't forget, this is an American lefty talking. Okay. Moving right along. Unfortunately, Bernie has got offside with some sections of the left in the US over his position on Palestine and his situation to do with Israel. Maybe question time can bring some of that out. What's termed the anti-Sanders elites in the Democratic Party have successfully diverted attention from themselves after undermining Sanders and after their election campaign failures, and it was called Blame Russia. So what happened? After the 2016 election, the Democratic Party was faced with two choices. One was admit that it was a bad campaign and fix their corrupt behaviour. WikiLeaks showed that the Democratic National Committee was corruptly undermining Bernie Sanders the whole bloody time. Well, maybe he would have, yeah. The second one was to divert the spotlight off the Democratic Committee's behaviour and blame least to take the spotlight off them. And the thing they came up with, at least that's this author's view, was blame Russia. In short, the Democratic Party's anti-Bernie establishment needed to reframe the discourse in a hurry, and in tandem with mass media, it did. Another one, bringing us up to just June, just a couple of months ago, less than a couple of months ago. A new effort to draft Bernie Sanders for a People's Party. There was an attempt to get Bernie to be the leader of a new political party of the left. Okay, then following that one, same month, June, Sanders, the political revolution is on. Sanders noted that there was a lot of work remains if the Democratic Party is going to be able to rebuild itself. He called for rebuilding of the party from the ground up in all 50 states. The reason I'm jumping through these is because it's coming to some points at the end. And then we've got July, just less than a month ago. There's been a number of, one moment, I'll get that one. Sanders for 2020 in discussions over a second White House run. And it was said that people remain hopeful that the senator will give it another go. The fact he's 75 now, he'll be 79 then. The fact that he's previously stated in February 2017 that he prefers reforming the Democratic Party than starting a new party, coupled with his continuing and recent PR work for the Democratic National Committee, probably means he will not start a new party. Okay. And of course, who better to bring up at this stage than Chomsky? We all know about libertarians. There's right-wing ones and left-wing ones, and Chomsky's one of the latter. His critique of US leftism, or liberalism as he terms it. For liberal opinion, the political crime of the century is Russian interference in American elections. However, the effects of the crime are undetectable, unlike the massive effect of interference by corporate power and private wealth, not considered a crime, but the normal workings of democracy, inverted commas. That's even putting aside the record of US interference in foreign elections, Russia included. And the same author, who's Paul Street, by the way. Some of this stuff comes from Counterpunch, some from Information Clearinghouse and other such likes. Support without conditions, even after WikiLeaks. So we're going from positive things about Bernie, a couple of negative things. Support without condition, even after WikiLeaks. Come up with the undermining of Bernie. By promising, it's called Bernie's folly. By promising from the start and then acting without conditions on his pledge to back the lying. I don't think he liked Hillary Clinton, but I'll give it to you in full. Without conditions on his pledge to back the lying arch-neoliberal Wall Street warmonger Hillary in the general election, Sanders never tried to compel the Democratic Party to run a populist and hence winning campaign. He imposed no conditions for his backing of her, even after it became clear from a treasure trove of hacked emails released by WikiLeaks that the Clinton campaign and its allies in the Democratic National Committee and the corporate media had rigged the game to prevent Sanders from wresting the nomination away from the listless and reactionary Hillary. Obviously, Paul Street didn't like her. Okay, so how's Bernie going now? In the Senate, unfortunately, and I think there's a lot we can gain from what Bernie's been doing. Recently, there were only 2 senators that voted against the sanctions on Russia and Iran, of course, for alleged meddling in the US election. Iran wasn't accused of election interference. One of those was Rand Paul, a rather interesting or rogue Republican, and the other was Bernie Sanders. All the Democratic senators, the whole lot, voted for the sanctions. It was only Bernie of the Democrats that voted against it. So I mean, you can't say that Bernie's got a lot of support of the party around him. Well, you just cannot say that. Okay, key points from this section. I'll move to the final after that. Key points to note: there's been a failure of what's the left's there just been discussing for at least 2 years, of the identity of politics approach to change in the USA, and that debate is continuing. The Democratic Party is maintaining its right-wing, warmongering, business-friendly approach. It's a sad observation that the left's so weak that all many people could do after Clinton's defeat was march in the street demanding a recount. The street movements have faltered. The Occupy movement, the 99%, has had an impact, but what's going on there now with them? Climate justice, tenants' rights, Black Lives Matter, some have maintained momentum, but it's very sporadic. Bernie Sanders seems in no hurry to commit to a new left party. He said he wants to reform the Democratic Party and is campaigning for that party as we speak. Sanders is also in some trouble with others on the left, and I mentioned because of the issue of Palestine, and unfortunately for him, if he is thinking of running again, his wife's in trouble because of falsified loan documents, which obviously they'd be able to use. Therefore, I think he's waiting to see what chance there is of reforming his chosen party before deciding to stay or go. If he decides to go, then there may be a chance of a third force in US politics, but not guaranteed because of the nature of the left in that country, which I've alluded to in the first bit. Okay, final part. Lessons for Australia in all this. It appears that the left has come out of the Cold War weakened, but nevertheless more effective and intact than the left in the US. I mentioned some statistics there to back that up. So there was something significant to work with. Decades later, when the CPA dissolved in 1991, there was 1,000 or more very politically experienced cadre that went in different directions. Quite a few joined the Search Foundation, but so far as political parties go, some joined the ALP, some joined the Progressive Labor Party, some joined the Greens. However, many, and possibly a majority, chose not to join any political party. They either got lost into the ether or joined other types of political organisation, not political parties. The Sanders effect has lessons for Australia, but not, in my opinion, huge, due to the different history and the nature of the left in each country. But such as it is, we can study this hot-cold relationship and that of his supporters with the Democratic Party. Also, his successful embracing of left-wing populism outside the mainstream Democratic Party organisation. This could teach us something. A question, is left-wing populism an option? Don't need to go into what left-wing populism is. The rhetoric often consists, to some extent, of anti-elitist sentiments, opposition to the system, fairer distribution of wealth, taxing the rich, and so on. Okay, so if that was to happen in Australia, I don't think it's going to come from. Certainly not going to come from Bill Shorten. I don't think it's going to come from the Greens, personally. I think it could come from the development of a third force in Australian politics could come, and a left-wing populism be successful. And it may well come from the union movement. We'll wait and see. Very briefly, if Jeremy Corbyn is capable of doing that of a left-wing populism in the UK, I didn't believe that was possible a few months ago. I was there during the election in the UK, and I've swung a little bit to now to the regard that maybe it's possible. I wouldn't say not necessarily, but more likely for various reasons. Unlike Sanders, Corbyn has the support of the majority of party members, not the majority of his parliamentary colleagues, but the majority of the party members. Though like Sanders, Corbyn does not or so I should say did not have that support of these parliamentary colleagues. Anyway, we're not talking about Corbyn tonight. Finally, some messages from some optimistic and some dispirited members of the left in the US that could be messages to us, all of us in this room. Okay, first of all, Joshua Frank from Counterpunch. Where is the left? We don't need conspiracies to justify our opposition to war in Syria. What we need are grounded, class-orientated politics and an intellectual anti-imperialist wake-up call. We need organising. From Yotam Marion from ZNet, USA, a letter to the left. In the end, only a genuinely popular movement can defeat Trump and the right-wing populist tidal wave he rode in on. Only a truly left populist movement can ensure that this regime not only falls, but it takes the entire Republican Party and the establishment Democrats along with it. Only a movement like that will be powerful enough to actually reorganise this society so that it meets both the very real material needs and the soaring potentials of the people in it. Seamus Cook, The Death of Pragmatic Politics. Shifting political winds are battering the establishment as the breeze flows. This is very artistic. What? Artistic, very, very floral. Shifting political winds are battering the establishment as the breeze flows to the back of the populists. The left populist Bernie Sanders didn't conjure the hurricane, but adjusted his sails to it. As the political storm will grow apace with rising income inequality, the new social attitudes are bringing fresh expectations, transforming politics as we know it. The populist-fuelled organising helped expose the wide gap in the establishment's politics, whose corporate interests prevent the satisfying of such demands. Bernie recognised that this was happening and seized the moment, running on a platform that connected with the emerging mood. And this is the last bit. Can we also learn from Sanders and the USA left something about the failure of identity politics? And Dave Lindoff addresses this from Counterpunch. We need to be a movement, not a bunch of lobbyists. There are 4 big issues such a movement could be built around. He looks at work and job and retirement, job security, retirement security, healthcare, climate change, and the peace and military spending issue. Building a movement around these 4 big overarching issues could lead to the establishment of a new party of the left, according to Dave Lindoff. Building a left progressive political alternative in the US is doomed to failure if the focus is on specific demands of identity groups, as important as those issues are, like gay rights, abortion rights, and immigration reform, as important as they may be. It's not that such issues should be ignored, they should not be, but taken as a whole, they are not unifying demands around which to build a movement. We need to focus on big demands and big issues that benefit all but the ruling elites, and that will fundamentally change the way the country operates. That's a little mix of messages from the left in the US, the debates they're having at the moment about a number of really important political issues, and linking that into what Bernie Sanders and the left in the US may be able to offer us here in Australia. Thank you. Okay.